There's something driving me a little bit crazy, and it's the fact that the best brisket I've ever cooked on my Kamado Joe wasn't technically cooked on a Kamado. Hey, I'm James from Smoking Dad Barbecue, and today is all about brisket on the Kamado Joe. So that brisket that I did on my Kettle Joe came out fantastic, and it's been driving me nuts that the best brisket I've ever cooked actually isn't on a Kamado Joe. Now, one of the things I normally talk about is only changing one variable at a time. But when I did this brisket on the Kettle Joe, I threw everything at it. I did my first ever foil boat. I also switched to fat cap up versus fat cap down. For 10 years, I've used the fat cap down because I always sort of believe you should have your fat cap towards the heat, help protect the brisket. The problem with doing this is it just falls off when you cut on the board, and it's completely wasted. And more importantly, it's missing that proper taste and texture. Anyone who's ever had the chance to eat a 10 out of 10 brisket cooked on an offset, you really come to appreciate that rendered caramelly sticky fat cap on top, and you do not get this if you cook fat cap down. The other variables that I threw at it was a water pan, and using the Kettle Joe, it's not as fuel efficient as the Kamado Joe, where I just had an open burning fire. This meant I had to add charcoal 2-3 times throughout the cook in order to pull this off. But the end result of all these variables was one fantastic brisket. So we're gonna try and recreate it on the Kamado Joe Classic 3 today. So what we already know about cooking a brisket on the Kamado Joe is a couple things. First, hotter and faster ends up much better than lower and slower. To prove this, I did 2 briskets at the exact same time, side by side, and the hot and fast brisket had a couple things going for it that the low and slow didn't have. The smoke ring was more pronounced, the bark was much better. The only downside of this approach is that the bottom of my brisket was overdone, but I think we have a fix for that. But we know we can lock in the memory bank. A hotter temperature, 270 degrees is about the perfect temperature, turns out a much better brisket, not just in how it looks, but also how it tastes. And that's because we're getting a nice, clean burning fire. And this is one of the things I suspect that was going on inside my Kamado Joe Kettle Joe that helped that brisket turn out so well. The Kettle Joe has next to no insulation versus the ceramic base and dome of the Classic Joe or the Big Joe. Instead, it's getting a little bit of heat protection from the ceramic firebox, but everything else is metal, and that's dissipating heat. And so anytime that I looked at the exact same temperatures, there's a bit of an inferno fire at all times, which is why my charcoal lump pile was extinguished so quickly, and I had to add more fuel through the cook. Whereas in a Kamado Joe Classic or Big Joe, you never need to add more fuel. So challenge number 1 for today's cook is how can we get a fire burning much, much hotter without overdoing the bottom of our brisket. Let me tell you the game plan for how I'm gonna set up to pull off these 2 tricks. So what I've come up with for today's experiment is what I'm gonna call the double indirect method. So if I was to use just the heat deflector plates, one of the challenges with that is if I get them too hot, the radiant heat from the heat deflector plates will overcook our bottom. Same is true with the SloRoller. If I do it too hot, I can quickly and easily overcook the bottom. And so what this encourages you to do is cook at a lower temperature, somewhere around 270, but that 270 still is sometimes not enough heat to get that same result that I got inside my Kettle Joe. And I think the way to overcome this is to use both sources of heat deflectors. So I'm first going to install my SloRoller, just like normal, and then I'm going to install the heat deflector plates on top of that. And I think what this will allow me to do is protect the bottom of our brisket and run our Kamado Joe at a hotter temperature without getting any of the downsides from running the grill at a 300 to 350 degree Fahrenheit temperature range. And the benefit here, the big gamble, is that this will improve the fire that we have burning in our charcoal basket to the point where we're getting a clean burn all the time. And so our charcoal will be burning clean, our wood will be burning clean, and putting off clean blue smoke. And that's how I hope to be able to recreate some of the magic of the brisket that I did on the Kettle Joe inside of my Kamado Joe Classic 3. The other thing that I'll be doing today, taking from the Kettle Joe video, I did my first ever foil boat, and I also started trying fat cap up. And this is something that has been bothering me compared to any brisket that I've eaten off of an offset, which is the general rule of thumb here, if you haven't heard it, is put your fat cap towards the heat source. So if you're cooking on an offset, the heat is coming over top of the brisket, fat cap up. If you're cooking on a Kamado style grill where the heat is coming from the bottom, fat cap down. But one of the problems with this method is when you put the fat cap down, it just sort of turns to rendered mush, and when you put it on your board and you slice through, you're just discarding all of that fat. And fat is flavor, and that is what you were really missing if you've ever had the chance to taste a brisket where the fat cap is up and properly rendered. And this is something that the minute I tasted my Kamado Joe Kettle Joe brisket, I knew I had been missing, and I just had to find a way to incorporate this missing ingredient back into my Kamado style briskets. And so the way that I'm going to pull this off is the exact same method that I used in that Kettle Joe video, which is using a foil boat. This is going to allow me to protect the bottom while running a hotter, cleaner burning fire. And based off the success that Mad Scientist Barbecue had introducing the butcher paper and the foil boat, I'm going to try that to see if that also helps the fat cap render out and breathe through the butcher paper while we get the full protection and benefit of that foil boat. So let me take you back in time yesterday and show you exactly how I wanted to prep and season today's brisket, since we were throwing this on the grill at about 5:30 this morning, and I wouldn't have time to explain all this in advance. All right, let's trim up our brisket. I've got everything that I'm gonna need. Later on, after we clean up, we're gonna mix up our rub with just some black pepper and some Diamond Kosher crystal salt. Some kitchen scissors are handy to have just to open up the package so we're not dulling our nice knife. I'll be using a Dow Strong 6-inch Shogun for filleting. And then I've got a drying rack that I'm going to leave this on in the fridge overnight. Some garbage, paper towels, everything that we're gonna need to trim up our brisket. So I'll take you fast forward while we get to work. Okay, we got our brisket all trimmed up outside of just one little bald spot. Got a little too aggressive. We've got our flat down to about 1/4 of an inch, and then I went and removed a little bit extra off of the point end, since that has more than enough intermuscular fat to keep our brisket from drying out. And so our total weight in trimmings here, you can see almost everything is white, exclusively fat, was just over 3 pounds. So this is now about a 12-13 pound brisket. So what we're going to do now is just mix up some salt and pepper at a 50-50 ratio and coat our brisket. I'm going to start on the bottom side and finish on our presentation side, since again we will be cooking this fat side up. I don't want the rub to fall off, so that's the side I will season last. I'll take you fast forward while we do that. So since we'll be getting started early tomorrow, let's take advantage of our evening light to set up our Kamado Joe Classic 3 so it's ready to go at the crack of dawn. Now, since I'm trying the double indirect method, the hope here is that I get a cleaner burning fire that's using more fuel. I'm going to waste more fuel, but for the hopes here of getting that nice clean fire that's going to help with our smoke ring and our smoke taste. That's the game plan anyways. And because of that, I'm going to try one more piece of smoking wood than normal. I would normally place about 2 pieces of smoking wood this size right on the bottom. So I'm going to try for a 1/3 smaller one here as well. So let's place these on the bottom of our charcoal basket, cover them with coal. Okay, so that looks great. Now this is definitely more charcoal than what I'm used to using, but since the game plan is to actually be burning it hotter and using our double indirect method to prevent that heat from coming up and heating up our dome and our brisket, I'm thinking we'll burn through more. So since we're charting some uncharted waters here, I'll play it a little bit safe and go with more charcoal than I need. If you're cooking normally, this is enough to run for 24 hours, and so this is way more charcoal than what we need, but I can still see air holes all the way around And I'm using big block, which has lots of space and volume for air to get all the way through, so I'm not worried about removing any of my airflow. So now let me show you how we're going to set up for our double indirect setup. So starting off like normally, first thing I'm going to do is drop in the base of our SloRoller. I have to remove this to light it, but I'll just show you what it'll look like. We'll put in the top portion of our SloRoller, then our divide and conquer rack. Then I'm going to use my X accessory ring on the second level of the divide and conquer. This is the series 3, so I have the 3 levels, taking advantage of the extra height that we get. And since I'm using the heat deflectors here, let me show you where the double indirect setup comes in. So since this is normally where I'd place my drip tray, my smokeware pan isn't going to work today because it's just that little bit taller that when I set it on top of the heat deflector plates, the cooking grids are sitting up on that. They're not sitting down properly like they should. So to make up for that, what I've done is just taken a little bit of a pizza tray and covered it in foil. That's about the same size diameter as our deflector stones, and those will fit under no problem. So that's the game plan for tomorrow. So we'll have our SloRoller, which will be pushing smoke to the outer edges and circulating. I think everything's still being round. It shouldn't interfere too much with the smoke pattern, but we're also going to get some indirect protection from our deflector plates, which I think is going to help block some of that heat, encourage a slightly hotter, cleaner fire, which I think will improve the smoke. Now I'm cooking on the Classic 3, which is an 18-inch grid, and our brisket after trimming is 21 inches. So the game plan is to maybe use a chunk or two of smoking wood and drape it over just so we can squish it in, at least for those first few hours of the cook until it shrinks up and I'll be able to set it on the cooking grids normally. So that's it. That's the game plan for tomorrow. I'll see you in the morning when it's time to fire it up. So since everything was ready to go for me this morning, all I had to do was pull out the grid from showing you how I had set up last night, get my grill torch and start a fire. In the morning like this, when I want to get the food cooking quickly, I do like using the torch since I am up to temperature with nice clean smoke in T-minus 20 minutes versus this taking closer to an hour if I was to use fire starter cubes. So time is of the essence. So I just concentrated a fire in the center of the SloRoller box and waited till the grill passed the hand test. The hand test means you start to feel heat in our dome. Otherwise, if you go too quickly, you might just have a bit of a rogue flame coming up and kissing that thermometer that's letting you know you're up to temperature when in fact you're not quite there yet. Once the grill was passing the hand test, I reinstalled everything needed to get ready for today's cook and just waited for the temperatures to stabilize. I put the bottom draft door where I always like to put it down to a single finger's width, but this allowed me to be past that first line on the control tower top, which is going to let me run the grill somewhere between 300 to 330 degrees Fahrenheit, banking on the protection that I'm going to have from the double indirect method. So this brisket is about 21 inches in length and the Kamado Joe Classic 3 is 18 inches. I grabbed 2 spare pieces of smoking wood and just used that like Harry Sue's showing in a couple of his videos to create a bit of a prop that I could drape the brisket over and get that to fit in until it shrinks up. Somewhere around 160 degrees Fahrenheit, that brisket will have shrunk up enough that I can remove those wood chunks and just let it lay flat and start to straighten out and cook the rest of the way, laying flat on the cooking grids. I'm going to leave this alone as it is, again, until about that 160 degree Fahrenheit spot, when I will remove those wood chunks and spray any parts of the brisket that are starting to look like they might be drying out. After about another hour of cooking where we've had the spray and the brisket's been laying flat, my temperatures are starting to look like they're getting ready for that next phase of our cook. When I rub the brisket, it passes the scratch test, lets me know I've got a great bark, and I'm really happy with the color and the texture all over the top and sides of our brisket. So I think it's ready to move into our foil boat method. So to do that, I'm going to start off by laying 2 sheets of butcher paper out on a table and just quickly wrapping that, folding over the sides so you have a tight little blanket around our brisket. And then same thing with some aluminum foil. Just put the brisket in the middle and roll that foil up around the edges until that hugs as tightly as possible. You want that contact because that's going to be what helps accelerate the cooking time. It's not just there to collect any of the fat that renders out, which you would get, but it's also meant to accelerate the cook, which is why you want your boat as tight as possible around all sides of the brisket. I just reinstalled my meter probe into the thickest part of the point and flat towards the very front of the brisket, and we're ready to throw this back on the grill and let it ride until we get close to that 200 Fahrenheit mark, when I want to start switching from the meter for an overall temperature to using my Thermapen MK4 to get a probe feel where it should feel like I'm probing a jar of room temperature peanut butter, and then I know our brisket will be ready for the rest and hopefully an amazing result later on for dinner. All right, so it is now exactly almost to the minute 12 hours after we first put this brisket on our Kamado Joe this morning. So the breakdown was 9 hours on the grill, cooking at a hot, fast temperature, averaging around 320 Fahrenheit, and then 3 hours in the cooler, exactly as you see it in our foil boat, as well as wrapped in our butcher paper. And I left the meter probe in the entire time, and I can tell that our brisket is still sitting above about 153, 154 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's kept it warm without even adding the towel or any other protection. So that is still food safe and good to go. Let me bring the camera close while we slice it up and see if our double indirect method is onto something for turning out the perfect brisket inside our Kamado Joe. All right, let's slice into this and see how it looks. Ooh. Excellent looking smoke ring, juices galore. Let's slice up our flat and see how it tastes. So, flapping passes the bend test no problem. Pulling apart really easy. Let's do a taste test. Can't wait. So just handling this brisket, I can already tell it has a couple things that I'm looking for. That fat cap is so sticky, and that is the sign of a properly rendered fat cap. That's going to give us that sweet caramelly taste that I'm looking for versus just lots of moisture or maybe slimy stuff on top. We're not getting any of that. Let's dig in here and try a piece of our flat though and see if it tastes as good as I think it might. Got my piece, smoke ring top and bottom, looks wonderful. Let's try it. That is really good. I am really happy with that. I always like to start with the flat because it lets me know what I have coming in my favorite part of the brisket, the point end. That, I think our double indirect method has made a difference here. I'm getting clean smoke, nothing that tastes overly smoky. You're just getting that nice, pure, kind of crisp flavor, if that's a way of describing it, versus anything that feels ashy or dirty. None of that is coming through. Plus, like I mentioned, how it felt, the texture is exactly what you want to get. And the top here is the best I've ever done on the side of a Kamado Joe already. I can go ahead and call it that before we try our point end. Let's slice up our point end, get a piece of that, and try it to see if it's as good. Slicing like butter. Oh, that looks so good. It's just pull apart. Wonderful tenderness. Let's go ahead and try that. I know it was coming. We get to the point end, but nothing just prepares you for how awesome that is. It was just a flavor bomb. And so not only getting the great salt content, I definitely picked up a little bit more in the point end. So I just so happy with how that salt brine overnight turned out, because I was able to get some of that texture and the taste of the salt that I didn't get on the flat. And again, that fat caramelization. I wish I could share this with you. It is so good. So I think we are definitely onto something, not only with the hotter and faster, which we've previously confirmed, but also with our brisket boat method and going fat cap up. That's another thing I will not be going back away from. And in terms of the double indirect method, I'm able to cut through no problem, thanks in part to a good knife that makes it easier to slice, but I'm not getting any overdoneness on the bottom that helps make it easier to get a perfect slice every time. I hope you really enjoyed today's experiment. Let me know in the comments what you want to see next. But in the meantime, please let YouTube know you like this video by hitting the thumbs up button, and let me know by hitting subscribe to catch future videos. Until next time, I'm James from Smokin' Dad Barbecue, signing off.